Part 2. How full of hope I was when my suitcases, small stereo, typewriter towels, sheets, new bedspread, and of course the antique fish aquarium were loaded into the family station wagon. My parents and two youngest siblings accompanied me to Chapel Hill, where they assisted me in moving all of my belongings into my dorm room. My adventure had begun, and I was popping with enthusiasm, so much enthusiasm that the stiff, forced smiles on the faces of my parents hardly registered upon my brain when we said our final goodbyes outside the door of my dorm room. How surprised they would have been to know that their daughter, who was enrolled in a variety of introductory courses that included French, calculus, psychology, and evolution, saw herself primarily as the student of an invisible teacher she had come to call the larger mind. It was this larger mind, I believed, that had soundlessly spoken to me for the very first time in a Sunday school class in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I was here to learn how to love, and soon the voice of the larger mind, which came to me silently from within, would surely begin to teach me how to do just that. I imagined that I would receive, as a sort of ongoing silent dictation from within, regular weekly lessons. I planned to keep a record of all these lessons in a paper-bound How to Love notebook. Determined to be a good student of the larger mind, I tried, to the very best of my ability, to be as quiet as possible, as often as I could, in order to listen for whatever soundless messages might come from within. Every morning, as I walked to my 8 o'clock French class, I waited for the inner voice to speak. Whenever I made my way from building to all my other classes, and then on my way back to the dorm each afternoon, I would try my best to quiet my mind in order to hear the inner voice. But to my great disappointment, the voice did not return. Not even late at night, after my roommate Kitty and I had turned off the lights and I was in my bed staring at the ceiling of our darkened dorm room, silently pleading with the larger mind to please, please speak to me again. I waited and I waited, but the days turned to weeks, and still the voice did not return. Thinking that maybe I needed more time to myself, I began to go for solitary walks across campus on the weekends and in the evenings, but my efforts were in vain. One night, on yet another solitary walk across campus, I wondered what was wrong. Was I being punished for a mistake I had made? Surely the larger mind would not desert me. Not now. Not after I had so seriously committed myself to following its direction. Besides, how could it desert me? My mind lived inside the larger mind, or so I believed. Could I have been mistaken? My scalp suddenly prickled with a hot flash of fear. What if everything I had experienced that night, shortly before my high school graduation, had been nothing more than my mind's imagination? Then I remembered the message from the inner voice that night. The only reason you are here is to love. And I remembered my tears, the immense amount of gratitude I had felt upon receiving this message. Surely such strong emotions were proof that what I had experienced was, in fact, real. But then I remembered a story. Perhaps it was one my father had shared concerning a psychiatric study of three men housed in the same mental institution who each believed he was Jesus. Each Jesus, even when confronted by two others claiming to be Jesus, believed he was the one and only Son of God and that the other two were either lying or crazy. Though I didn't consider myself to be Jesus, was my experience that night, which had felt so real to me, rooted perhaps in a similar form of psychosis? I had learned from my psychology readings that schizophrenics often experienced their first symptoms of insanity during their young adult years, between their late teens to late 20s. And I was almost 18 the night I had received the silent but energetically powerful inner message that had so dramatically changed my life. Could my earlier childhood experiences, the nighttime visions, the messages I had received on my God radio have been hints of a developing psychosis? I knew that schizophrenia had a genetic component, and we did have at least one schizophrenic in our family. My mother's exceedingly bright cousin, diagnosed with schizophrenia when she was a college student, had been discovered one night wandering naked on the University of Georgia campus. Would the same thing happen to me? Here I was, already wandering across the campus of UNC, alone every night after dinner. Would I soon be wandering the sidewalks of my campus naked? "Where are you?" I silently transmitted to the larger mind. "I decided you were real. I dedicated my life to you. How could you have deserted me?" No response. I turned and headed back to my dorm, wondering with every step how long it would be before I knew one way or the other whether or not I was crazy. As if I didn't have enough to worry about, my roommate Kitty began to complain of pains in her abdomen. I hoped it was a stress-related malady, some minor problem that would be easily resolved, but her complaints of pain grew more frequent. A week before midterms, when we should have been heading off to the cafeteria together, I found her packing her suitcases. "My parents want me back at home," she said. "We need to figure out what's going on in my body." She offered to let me keep the antique fish aquarium we had purchased the previous spring, but I told her to take it home with her. We had discovered it leaked, so it had remained empty and unused. On the first evening I was alone in our room, I found myself fighting back the tears. Kitty had been my last thread connecting me to a far happier past. This was long before the time of instant access to family members or friends via the internet or cell phones. Letter writing was the usual mode of communication back then, but all my letters to loved ones might as well have been transported into the inside of a black hole. My old boyfriend, Bill, still convinced, I assumed, that I was in the process of meeting someone better, had not responded to any of my earlier letters. I had forgotten to get the new mailing addresses of Martha, Julie, and Judy, and my family members seemed to be too busy to write. I kept a few pictures of my parents and my siblings pinned to a bulletin board above my desk. Often I would stare at their faces, trying to imagine I was back at home. In those days, my parents considered long-distance collect calls an extravagance, to be used only in the case of an emergency. So despite my extreme loneliness, I dared not call home. For the first time in my life, I was cut off from everyone and everything I had ever known or loved in my past, and there was nothing I enjoyed in my present life. For some reason, I suppose it was because I thought that drama and music had nothing to do with loving others, I had decided not to pursue any theatrical or musical activities. I had tried going on a handful of dates, but every guy who asked me out was either a socially awkward geek or a jerk who wanted to get me drunk so I would make out with him. When I had participated in a canoe trip with the Outdoors Club, I came back covered in chiggers. When I had taken a yoga class, I ended up putting my back out. When I had attended a party that was held in my dorm, the loud music and aroma of beer mixed with the smell of vomit had so overwhelmed me I had raced back to the safe confines of my room after only 5 minutes. And now, on top of that, I was worried about the state of my sanity. Perhaps because of this, my passion for psychology began to wane. If I were insane, it might not be such a good idea for me to spend much time around psychology professors, I thought. Would they have an innate sense that something was wrong with me? As if my brain were attempting to shield me from my psychology fears, I now found myself fighting to stay awake during the lectures of my psychology professor, and sometimes even while reading from the assigned text of our psychology class. It was as if my entire brain had changed. Even my knack for mathematics had disappeared. After getting my lowest test grade ever, a 72, on my first exam in calculus that term, I had dropped the class and joined instead the much easier pre-calculus course, a class which I had jokingly referred to as my remedial math class, but which secretly filled me with shame. I had lost my friends and all sense of fun. I no longer felt connected to my family or to the larger mind. And now I was losing my smarts and might also be on the verge of losing my sanity. What was happening? How could I have lost everything that had always been mine? Never once did I consider making an appointment with a doctor at the Student Health Center. I had read about depression, and I knew there was a high likelihood that I might be clinically depressed. But if the root of my mental and emotional problems was something more serious, for instance, the beginning stages of schizophrenia, I wanted to keep my problems a secret for as long as possible. Soon, however, my fear of being insane became overshadowed by my looming sense of loneliness. In desperation one weekend, alone in my dorm room, I decided I would attempt to pray one last time to the larger mind, making my prayer as formal as possible. Even if I could never prove beyond a shade of a doubt that any of my earlier mystical experiences were true, I realized now, for the first time ever, how much I wanted the larger mind and its middle-of-the-night message about love to be real. If I were truly here to love, then what could be more practical than pursuing a degree in psychology as I had initially planned? All I needed was a little help in releasing my fears concerning my sanity, and surely I would then regain all of my earlier passion for psychology. Making sure that the door to my room was locked, I cleared off my desk that night and placed upon it a small white candle that I had purchased from a nearby grocery store. Lighting the candle, I turned off my desk lamp and knelt in front of my simple altar. "Hello," I said aloud, the palms of my hands drawn together as I tried to envision the larger mind, that gigantic sea of consciousness which I believed contained my own small mind. If I'm here to love, I said aloud, but very quietly, then I think it would be very practical if I become a psychologist. If I'm a psychologist, I would be able to love my clients. But I can't become a psychologist if I keep falling asleep in class or whenever I read from my psychology textbooks. I ask that you help me to stay awake. And I thank you for helping me to become a psychologist. And then, because I was trying my best to pray as earnestly as possible, I ended my prayer with a firmly spoken Amen. Immediately, at the sound of that Amen, I was injected with a surge of hope. The dark film that had been coating my entire world suddenly evaporated. My heart felt, for the first time that school year, as if it were singing. I knew, simply because I could feel it, that my prayer had been answered. A big change had occurred. A switch inside me had been flicked. There was no more reason for me to worry. I knew that I would be okay. Thank you, I said aloud to the larger mind, and I smiled. Not only was I going to be okay, I also knew that I was no longer alone. The following Monday in my psychology class, the big change became more evident when I noticed I wasn't nodding off during my professor's lecture. And then, at the end of the day, back in my dorm room, the big change revealed itself yet again. Reading through my assignment from the psychology text, I found my mind alert and fully engaged. My passion for psychology was back, and that meant my prayer had indeed been answered. I was on my way to becoming a psychologist. Thank you, I said aloud to the larger mind. Happily, I began to dream of my future. If I went to summer school, I could actually graduate in 3 years rather than 4, which meant that very soon I would be on my way to graduate school. My father had promised me that if I chose to pursue graduate studies, I could attend any school I liked. One day in my not-so-distant future, I would be a licensed psychologist with a practice set up in whichever state I chose as my new home. I might move to California. People there, I had been told, were weird and new agey. More like me, in other words. An image of a small cottage on the Pacific coast came to my mind. I could imagine myself standing beside a sunny wall of sliding glass doors that opened onto a small deck of gray weathered wood, and beyond the railing and steep steps of the deck, a narrow, rocky beach where I would be serenaded by the waves of the ocean and the squawks of flying seagulls. Rap, 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 came a knock at the door, and I jumped. Who is it? I called. Becky, came the muffled response. Becky, that strange girl from down the hall who always wore drab-colored baggy pants and a button-down, untucked collared shirt that was either white or light blue. She kept her mousy brown, thick chin-length hair parted on one side, and whenever she tilted her head, which was often, a sweeping curtain of hair would cover completely one of her eyes. The uncovered eye, sad-looking and dark brown, combined with her full cheeks and a downward-pointing mouth, always made me think of a basset hound. What in the world did she want? I wondered. Hi, I said, plastering my face with a polite smile after I opened my door. She did not return my smile. "I need someone to talk to," she said. Her head, as usual, was tilted so that only one sad eye stared at me mournfully, while her other eye remained hidden beneath her thick wave of hair. "Do you have a second?" she asked. "Sure," I said. "Come in." I shut the door behind us, and she sagged down on the corner edge of my bed. I drew my chair away from the desk so that I could position myself in front of her. "What's wrong?" I asked. She let out a long sigh and stared down at the floor with her one uncovered eye. "No one wants to be my friend," she said. No surprise there, I thought to myself, but I wasn't going to tell her to begin smiling more, to unveil her other eye, or to begin taking an interest in others by asking them polite questions. No, I wasn't going to tell her that because just that instant I'd been struck with a brilliant idea. I had asked the larger mind to help me become a psychologist. Was this unexpected visit from a strange girl on my hall a gift from the larger mind? A way for me to begin practicing, perhaps, the art of loving another as a counselor might? Maybe, just maybe, Becky was my first ever client. If so, this was yet another part of the great change that had occurred, another way my prayer had been answered. I had been presented with a new job: to listen to Becky as carefully and as compassionately as I could, and to make sure that she knew I was giving her my full attention. In my short tenure as a psychologist in training, I had learned that there were ways of helping a client to know that he or she has been heard. The psychologist or counselor might offer, for example, comments such as, "So what I hear you saying is," or, "Could you explain further what you mean by?" Simple phrases such as, "I see," or "My, what a challenge this must be," could also be used. It had all seemed like common sense to me. How hard could it be to listen compassionately with one's full attention? "Larger mind," I quickly and silently prayed, "for as long as Becky needs me, I want to be her friend and counselor." At the end of our first session, which lasted for 45 minutes, Becky swept her thick curtain of hair back behind her ear, looking at me with both of her brown basset hound eyes, and then her lips pressed together and lifted at each corner to form a straight line. It was the closest thing to a smile I had ever seen upon her face. "You're a good listener," she said. "Thank you." After she left, convinced that my session with my first ever client had gone well, I thanked the larger mind for helping me in these beginning stages of becoming a psychologist. The next evening, sitting at my desk while working on homework, a knock sounded on my door again. I thought it might be Becky, but instead it was Tommy, a young man from western North Carolina whose room was near Becky's, down the hall of our co-ed dormitory. "Do you have a moment?" he drawled. He was tall and skinny, brown cropped hair, short on all sides except for his bangs, which he constantly flipped back either with a hand or with a quick toss of his head. I had been told he was a chemistry major. "Sure," I said, but I decided not to close the door. Just as Becky had done the night before, Tommy plopped himself down upon my bed, but whereas Becky had slumped at the foot of my bed, Tommy lay down upon my bed, fully reclined on his back, the fingers of his hands hooked behind his neck. I hardly knew the fellow, and yet here he was, as comfortable upon my bed as if it were his own. Staring up at the ceiling, he proceeded to tell me about his women woes. Among other problems, there was a girl back home. She was serious about their relationship. He wasn't. I listened the best I could, using every appropriate affirming phrase possible, but after an hour had passed, I noticed that he still seemed very settled upon my bed, and I became worried. This was an invasion of my privacy. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I need to get back to work." "Oh, sure," he said. "Sorry, I lost track of time. You're so easy to talk to. Thank you." "You're welcome," I said, but I wasn't feeling the joy I had felt when I had walked Becky to my door the night before. Why had a young man I barely knew felt so comfortable lying on my bed? I couldn't help but wonder if Becky had recommended me to Tommy. The way he'd confidently marched into my room and stretched upon my bed as if he were on the couch of a psychiatrist's office made it seem as if from the very start he had been thinking of me as a counselor. The third night, there came yet another knock at my door. I felt wary as I lifted myself away from my desk. Who could it be this time? Yet again, it was someone from down the hallway, near where Becky lived, a blond fellow named Ed, who was short and had a receding hairline. We had been introduced once before and had exchanged quick greetings of hi or hello in the hallway whenever we would pass each other. "I've heard you're a good person to talk to," he said. "Do you have a minute?" Not feeling quite as confident this time around, I said, "Okay." Then I quickly offered him my desk chair. I did not want another man stretched upon my bed. I grabbed the unused chair from Kitty's empty side of the room, positioning it 4 feet in front of him. Ed, I found out, was a trombonist in the college marching band, but he wanted, more than anything, to be a doctor. The only problem was he was having trouble with chemistry, organic chemistry. He had already taken the class once before and had failed. Now he was taking it for a second time, but his grades were so poor he feared he would fail organic chemistry yet again. "What do you think I should do?" he said. Holy tamale! Why was he asking me? I wasn't a chemistry major, and I knew nothing about pre-med requirements. Shouldn't you be talking to your advisor about this? "Well," he said, "maybe so, but I thought I would talk to you first." Suddenly, my little game of playing counselor wasn't so much fun anymore. More than anything, I wanted this young man to be out of my room, so I stood up. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I need to get back to work. What I recommend is that you set up an appointment tomorrow with your advisor, okay?" "Okay," he said as he stood up, but I could tell he was disappointed. I walked him to the door, and he hesitated, as if he were trying to think of something else to say. "Good night," I said, and I smiled and raised my hand in a quick wave goodbye. Yeah," he said. "Good night." The following evening, when a knock sounded yet again upon my door, it was Becky, back for a second time, though her demeanor had changed completely. "Why were you so rude to Ed?" she said, and she angrily swept her wave of hair behind her ear so that she could glare at me with both of her brown eyes. "All he wanted was a friend, someone who would listen. You listened to me. I thought you would listen to him. He said he likes you." Oh, crap. This was getting completely out of hand. "I wasn't trying to be rude," I said. I gave him good advice, but I wasn't the person he needed to talk to, and I was in the middle of doing my homework. And I suppose you need to get back to your homework now, she snapped. As a matter of fact, yes, I said. I trusted you, Becky said, raising a finger towards my face. I don't usually trust people, but I trusted you, and I opened up to you, but you let me down. You're just like everyone else. Holy hell! No wonder Becky didn't have many friends. She huffed down the hallway, and I shut my door. But in a few minutes there was another knock. I got up, feeling angry, expecting to see Becky again, but instead it was Tommy. He didn't even wait to be invited in. Straight to my bed he headed, and again he stretched out upon his back, hands clasped behind his neck. We need to talk, he said, staring up at the ceiling. I just got off the phone with my old girlfriend from high school. I want to break up with her, but I don't know how. Was I in the middle of a bad dream? Tommy, I said, you're a smart guy. You obviously know how to express yourself, so do what you have to do. If you want to break up with her, then break up with her. But she really likes me. I don't want to hurt her. You don't need me for this, and I've got a lot of homework to do. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Well, you don't have to get snippy, he said. Slowly he rose to his feet, placed his hands in the pockets of his jeans, and swished his bangs out of his eyes with a toss of his head. Scraping the soles of his sneakers across the thin carpet on the floor, as if he were too lazy to lift his feet, he made his way to the door and shut it behind him just hard enough to let me know he was angry. I locked the door. How could I have been so stupid? Why had I prayed such a ridiculous prayer? I would hate having to listen all day long to people talk about their problems. I had no patience for such a job. I knew then that if I were to become a psychologist, I would grow to hate rather than love my clients. Larger mind, I prayed aloud. I have decided I no longer wish to be a psychologist. As of tonight, I withdraw my original prayer request. Thank you. Amen. Too disgruntled to care whether or not my prayer had been properly transmitted or even received, I trudged back to my desk. I had failed as an amateur counselor. I had also failed as a potential friend to 3 individuals from my dorm. No longer was I questioning the reality of the larger mind, but how, I wondered, was I ever going to learn how to love others when more and more now I found people to be so irritating? From that point on, I spent every evening at a study carrel in the far recesses of the stacks in Wilson Library, the graduate library, where I was sure not to run into anyone I knew. If there were more knocks upon my dormitory door, I did not want to be there to hear them. Though I was convinced that the larger mind had indeed answered my prayer about becoming a psychologist, I was embarrassed that I had asked for something that I did not truly want. I felt as foolish as the woodcutter's wife in the Brothers Grimm fairy tale, The 3 Wishes. After the woodcutter's wife absent-mindedly wishes for a string of sausages, her husband, the woodcutter, angrily declares, "I wish those sausages were stuck up your nose," which forces them to waste their final wish, asking that the permanent nose string of sausages be removed. As a way of forgetting my own stupidity, I made a vow to study extra hard for all my finals in French, psychology, pre-calculus, evolution, and the political science class I had also added to my schedule after dropping out of my initial calculus class. One night, as I sat in my usual library study carrel, bored to tears as I memorized all the life forms of the Mesozoic era for my upcoming evolution exam, I suddenly found myself daydreaming about a flute recital I had given as a teenager at the All Souls Cathedral in Asheville. I don't know if it was the church's interior structure that had inspired me, its substantial brick archways and tall tower of stained glass windows, or if it was simply my love of Bach's Partita in A minor for solo flute. But as I walked towards the platform in front of the church's altar that Sunday afternoon, I was struck with the most intense desire to transmit as a gift to the audience the beauty of this piece. A happy hum filled my heart when I placed my flute to my lips, and by the time I had reached my favorite movement, the slow and haunting saraband, it felt as if I were making love to the men and women seated in the pews. Never before, as a musical performer, had I looked directly into the eyes of my audience members. It felt as if a spell were being cast, but it was the beauty of Bach's soul, I believed, gushing through me like a geyser of joy that wove the web of magic in the sanctuary that afternoon. I had not wanted the music to end. I was standing, it seemed, on the threshold of heaven. At the end of the concert, several audience members rushed up to meet me. "Truly extraordinary," one man had said. "Thank you so much for the gift you gave us today," said an old woman. My flute instructor was ecstatic when she walked up to me afterwards. "Never have I heard so many positive comments," she said. "You were the star of the show today." Her husband, a fellow musician in the Asheville Symphony, agreed. "You are destined to be a professional," he said. "Don't let your talent go to waste." But I had allowed my talent to go to waste. At the end of my junior year of high school, I had stormed away from my school's symphonic band, angry with my band director's harsh judgment over my verbal slip of tongue, sick and tired of the intense musical competition he fostered between his top music students, and utterly convinced that most young musicians who sought a career in music were both foolish and impractical. Only those who are a Bach or a Beethoven should ever consider a career in music, I had often angrily proclaimed to anyone who would listen. Now I wasn't so sure. Had I taken my exit from music too hastily? After reciting to my flute instructor all my reasons for quitting the flute, her parting response was, "Well, you need to have your ass kicked." My piano teacher, who had once served as the practice pianist for the New York City Ballet, had pretty much said the same thing in cleaner language after I had announced 2 years before that I wished to discontinue piano lessons. Both of these musical mentors had said it was a sin to walk away from musical talent. If you had the ability to do something well, that meant you were destined to pursue that activity professionally. But did that mean, I had wanted to ask but didn't, that if you were good at sex, you were destined to become a prostitute? I had been utterly convinced, as I made my exit from both the piano and the flute, that I was leaving behind something that needed to be left behind. But that evening in the study carrel of Wilson Library, remembering the moment when I had experienced my greatest amount of joy, I found myself wondering, had my flute instructor been right? Had someone needed to kick my ass? A new idea dawned. Maybe I could kick my own ass. As hard as it would be, I decided, make a musical comeback. I hadn't taken my flute out of its case in over a year and a half, but I figured that with a lot of practice over my December break, I could probably get myself ready for an audition with the music department in January. The remembered joy I had experienced in the All Souls Cathedral washed through me. Maybe this was the way I was meant to love. If so, my way of loving others would not entail listening to them as they relayed to me their litany of emotional pains and problems. Instead, others would be listening to me, to the music I presented to them as a selfless gift of love. How beautiful it would be to experience yet again the sort of magic that had been created when I performed the Bach Partita in the sanctuary of the All Souls Cathedral. The memory of all that passion filled me with such yearning. Larger mind, I suddenly found myself silently praying, my eyes shut tight as I sat before the cramped metal desk of my study carrel. Help me to relearn how to play my flute well. I'm certain this time this is how I wish to love others. Help me to regain my embouchure, my crystal clear tone, and my fast-moving fingers. I ask to be a professional musician so that I can love others through the gift of music. Thank you for helping me to accomplish this. And then I ended my prayer with a heartily whispered, Amen. Once again, I felt the same internal surge of hope that I had experienced the night I had asked the larger mind for help in becoming a psychologist. Yes, I had made a mistake when I had decided to walk away from the flute, but the larger mind, I was sure, was going to help me regain what had been lost. There was no doubt in my mind that my audition in January would go well. I was looking forward to my practice sessions over break. Once my finals were over, I would be able to give a minimum of 3 to 4 hours a day to my musical practice. Already I could see myself standing upon a stage again, and I could imagine the magic that would yet again flow through me to an audience. I was in this world to love others through the vehicle of music. By the end of the first week of my second semester of college, I had a new roommate named Sal and an official new major, music. Sal, who was a tall brunette with a short pixie hairdo, had appeared at my door the day after my successful music audition. She had wanted to meet me before she moved in, to make sure, I supposed, that I wouldn't be too messy or too loud or too strung out on drugs. 2 years older than I, she was curious to know why I was majoring in music at UNC-Chapel Hill rather than UNC Greensboro, where most of the state's serious college musicians were found. She knew this because her own sister, a flutist like me, was a newly enrolled student in the highly competitive music school at UNCG. "Are you any good?" she asked. "I used to be," I said, "but then I walked away from the flute. I didn't play it at all for over a year, and then last month I decided I wanted to pick it back up again. Over break, I practiced my ass off to prepare for my music school audition. That was yesterday." "So are you in?" she said. "Yep, I'm in. Preparing now as all flute players must for some kick-ass competition. There are only 3 flutes in the orchestra, and I plan to be one of them." "Aren't there some concert bands you could join?" she asked. "My sister's in the top wind ensemble at Greensboro." I was surprised to find myself cringing at the thought. Yeah, I suppose I could join one of the wind ensembles here, but I prefer orchestral music." "Have you ever been in an orchestra?" "No, but all the music I listen to is orchestral." So why don't you like wind ensembles? She asked. I paused for a moment so that I could seriously consider her question. Why did I prefer the sound of an orchestra to the sound of a wind ensemble? Actually, I said, now that I think about it, it's the sound of the woodwinds I don't like. All those clarinets and saxophones and flutes. There are just too many of them. She smiled for the first time. You're weird. Yes, I already knew I was weird, but no matter what, I was determined to succeed upon my new path of loving others through the gift of music, and I would do whatever it took to accomplish my goal. Unfortunately, I had discovered that it was too late for me to audition for the university's orchestra, but I would be prepared for the next round of auditions. In the meantime, I planned to satisfy some of my ensemble credit hours by joining the co-ed Carolina choir. I had known I would have to audition for the choir and had prepared to sing Far from the Home I Love from Fiddler on the Roof. But what I hadn't known is that all singers were expected to sight read an unknown piece of music. I was given this unsettling news at the very beginning of my audition, before I'd even had the chance to sing my prepared piece. I'm sorry, I told the director, a slightly built, energetic man who bustled about the room as he spoke, but I can't sight read these notes. I don't have perfect pitch. The only sight reading I've ever done was for the flute or piano. Are you a music major? He asked, his back to me as he shuffled through a stack of music on a shelf. Yes, I said. He replied, grabbing a yellow pad of paper in one hand, a pen in the other. Finally, he settled into a captain's chair in front of where I stood. Have you ever done any singing? I told him about my part in Fiddler the year before and that I was planning to sing Far from the Home I Love as my prepared audition piece. Okay, then let's hear it, he said. I handed the music to his pianist, who was seated at an upright piano in the corner of the room. He spread my photocopied sheets of music before him on the piano and began to play. At the end of that familiar and beautifully poignant intro, I opened my mouth to sing the words I knew so well. How can I hope to make you understand? But absolutely no sound came out of my throat. I am so sorry, I said. I don't know what's wrong. May I start again? Certainly, said the director. Once more the pianist began the familiar intro, and once more I opened my mouth to sing. This time I was able to emit a sound, but it was barely more than a whisper. I am so sorry, I said. I don't know what's happening. I know how to sing this song. I've sung it before on a stage in front of an audience. You're nervous, the director said. I want you to take some slow, deep breaths. Concentrate on keeping your throat open. We'll try it one more time. Again, the piano started, and again I tried to eke out the notes of a song that had once been my starring solo piece upon a stage. Though my voice was only slightly louder than before, it was more akin to a dramatic stage whisper than to actual singing. The director held up his hand, and the pianist stopped. You know what? He said. I've decided I'm going to let you in anyway. You're new to this. I'm sure you'll get better with time. Thank you, I said, wanting to sink into the floor. How I wish I could have sent word to my old flute instructor that I was finally getting my ass kicked. The semester before, I had had to take what I considered to be the remedial math class, and now I was a remedial chorus singer, mainstreamed in with the rest of the chorus superstars who supposedly had perfect pitch and could easily sight read vocal music. What had I gotten myself into? During each rehearsal of the Carolina Choir, the director would stop us every so often, point a finger towards a singer, and randomly pick a handful of measures. You, I want to hear measures 32 through 40. And the singer, like the perfectly pitched pipe of an organ, would confidently sing every note the director had demanded. Very good, he would say. Oh my God, I thought. What's going to happen if he ever points to me? I knew I'd have to say, I'm sorry, but I can only sing what the girl beside me is singing. Whatever pitch her voice is on, that's what I sing. I can't read the notes of this music on my own. To save myself that embarrassment, I decided it was time to make another visit to the director's office and confess that my ability to sight read had not improved. You're a flutist, right? He said. Yes. Well, flute players are usually our best singers. You already know the pitches of each note. You just don't realize that you know. Give yourself some time. It'll come. Each evening after dinner, I dutifully marched over to my assigned practice room in the music building so that I could put in a good 2 hours of practice. It had been my intent to use those 2 hours to practice my flute. My fingers were still not as fast as I wanted them to be. I needed more practice time on my etudes and scales, but now I was also trying to practice the choral music so that I could teach myself how to sight read. I would look at the music and try to sing the notes of a single measure. Then I would play those same notes on the piano. Every time, though, I would be off by at least a pitch and a half. Part of the problem might have been that flute music is more akin to the soprano parts of a chorus, but after my initial audition, I had been placed in the alto section. The vocal register of an alto is more akin to an alto saxophone than a flute. Additionally, the sopranos had the melody, whereas the altos were always on harmony, and harmony is a heck of a lot more challenging to sing than the melody. I wondered if all those talented singing flute players the director liked so much were sopranos. I tried to talk to the director again about my little problem, but he dismissed me. Be patient, you'll work it out. And I tried to work it out. More and more, I devoted my entire 2-hour practice session to choral music rather than flute music. But no matter how much I practiced, my vocal sight reading skills did not improve. One day, the tip of the director's finger slowly circled towards me, but he must have seen the intense look of fear flash across my face because, after briefly lingering in my direction for a second, his finger then passed to the person next to me, the loud singer whose voice I always followed. Very good, he told her, after she had finished singing her requested measures. Well, at least I was following the voice of someone who knew how to sing. As long as I had her voice to lean on, I was fine. I was able to sing every note she sang. But on my own, I was mute. At the end of 3 weeks, I knew the director was running out of new faces to point to. Soon he would be forced to point his finger to me, and I would not be able to sing whatever measures he requested. One day, at the end of January, I decided to meet with the director one last time. I gave it my best, I said, but no matter how much I practice, I'm unable to sight read this music, and I don't want you pointing to me during a rehearsal asking me to sight read when I can't. I would die of embarrassment, which is why I've decided to drop out of the chorus. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, but his face didn't look at all sorry. He had the mentally occupied look of a man who wanted to get back to work. I had noticed the messy pile of papers on his desk. Thank you for giving me a chance, I said, and I deposited my folder of choral music on the corner of his desk and left. Maybe you can join us next semester, came his voice, trailing after me from his office as I made my way to the stairs. Now it was going to be harder to meet my music ensemble requirements, most especially if I didn't make it into the orchestra next term. I didn't know if any of the other university courses required that singers be able to sight read, but I was assuming they did, which meant that the school's choral ensembles were no longer an option for me. I might actually have to be in one of the school's wind ensembles for 1 or 2 semesters. That made me sigh. It was going to be a long time before I was able to love others through the gift of music. As for now, I had to get back to focusing solely on my flute practice. Even if it killed me, I needed to gain one of those seats in the orchestra. One especially cold night in February, on my way yet again to my practice room, I was suddenly stopped in my tracks by the soundless voice from within. "Is this how you wish to spend the rest of your life?" it said. I was stunned by the question, but even more stunned by the answer that instantly flashed forth from me. No, most definitely not. That was when I realized how miserable I was. Music was supposed to be fun, but I wasn't having any fun. Plus, I hated competition. That was one of the reasons I had initially walked away from the flute. Most people, including Mr. Stokes, my old band director from high school, assumed that the reason I had quit the band, and therefore the flute, was that he had not been nice to me after I had accidentally whispered the word shit in front of him. The day after that incident, I had formally apologized to him for my behavior, but he had angrily turned away, saying, "You wouldn't have said it if you weren't in the habit of using such bad language." Of course, that was true, but didn't he care about me as a human being? Wasn't my apology, which had been heartfelt and sincere, still worth his acceptance? But as angry as his reaction had made me, that wasn't the real reason I had decided to walk away from the flute. I had lied to everyone and had tried to lie to myself. But that cold February night, when I was stopped by the question from the inner voice, some kind of a shield dropped away from my mind, and I realized that I could no longer lie to myself. It wasn't just the competition I hated. The real reason I had walked away from the flute was the look I had received from my musical rival during our challenge for first chair one afternoon. She had not played well on the audition piece, and I was pleased. I knew I was going to win that particular challenge, and I did, in fact, play beautifully until the moment I made the mistake of looking up from my notes of music into the face of my opponent, who happened to be standing 4 feet in front of me. That brief moment of glancing up destroyed me, for that was when I was struck by the pure and utter hatred radiating from her eyes. I was so shocked by the power of all that raw emotion shooting forth like rays from her eyes, that I lost control of my embouchure. My lips began to tremble. I couldn't continue. In a daze, I slowly lowered my flute from my mouth, still not believing what had just occurred. That was the moment I had whispered the word shit, not in anger, but in utter defeat. My band director did not have to tell either of us who the winner of the musical challenge was that day. My opponent remained in first chair for the rest of the school year. I no longer had the heart for the intense musical battles that had taken place between us. I did not want the prize of first chair if it meant I would have to face again that most powerful of human emotions, hatred. I knew that her hatred for me was a mirror of my hatred for her. And it had disturbed me to my core to know that such a beast, the ability to hate, lived inside me. Wanting to avoid the hidden beast of human hatred within myself, I had walked away from the flute, scared shitless by what had been revealed to me that day. My old opponent from high school band was now a student at the music school at UNC Greensboro. She had what it took to be a professional musician, the toughness of a competitor. I did not. Yes, I had talent, and yes, I loved music. But that wasn't what the real world of musical performance was about. A long bridge of intense competition would have to be crossed before I was ever afforded another opportunity to perform as a gift in front of others. But I realized now more than ever that I did not want to be upon that bridge because of what might again be uncovered within myself. Walking back to the dorm that cold February evening, I suddenly knew why I disliked the sound of a woodwind band. It was, to my ear, a sound that symbolized hate-filled competition. The piano had become a similar symbol after my teacher, Rosalind Vogie, a tall and intimidating woman with enough strength to shake a Steinway grand piano as she played, had tried to forcefully groom me to become a competitive piano player. Even then, the thought of competing with other piano students had disturbed me. In my dorm room later that night, I told Sal that I had decided not to major in music. She turned to look at me from her desk and said, "Well, I'm not surprised." When I went to bed that evening, I fell asleep knowing that no bigger fool than I had ever walked the earth. A void opened in my heart after I resigned from UNC's music school, and that void soon became filled with the dark waters of despair. I didn't know how I was supposed to love others, and I had not received any other messages from within since the night before I had dropped out of music. Contributing to my despair that term was the big fat D I had earned on my first exam in the calculus course I was taking for the second time. Although I had made straight 100s on all my quizzes and tests in my remedial math class, the pre-calculus course I had taken the previous semester, I was still inexplicably dumb when it came to understanding calculus. No math instructor was able to explain to my satisfaction why I, a person who had made straight 100s in pre-calculus, was not able to make better grades in an introductory calculus course. Yet again, I dropped my calculus class and replaced it with another remedial math class, this one an intro statistics course. I had also tried taking chemistry that term, but had gotten an equally fat D on my first exam in that class, too. I was beginning to feel that the door to science was closing itself to me. In desperation, I took the advice of a UNC football player, Sal's boyfriend Bo, and dropped chemistry for geology, or as he referred to it, rocks for jocks. However, unlike the jocks who filled the seats of my geology class, I had not an ounce of athletic ability. After developing shin splints, I was forced that semester to drop my jogging gym class and eventually replace it with the less physically strenuous bowling gym class. But even in my bowling class, I was unable to succeed, scoring no higher than a 72. I soon discovered that in addition to being a klutz, I was also, as far as I knew, the only person on the planet who was allergic to marijuana. Each time my two sweet mates decided to get high, their sweet smelling pot smoke would seep through the doors of our shared central bathroom and cause my eyes to swell shut. An hour of cold compresses against my eyes helped to reduce the swelling enough to get them open, but not enough to avoid such comments as, "Wow, what happened to you?" My despair grew with each passing week. To my way of thinking, not only was I now officially stupid, I was also physically inept, and I had no sense of belonging and no sense of purpose. There was also nothing that gave me any sense of joy. By the middle of the semester, I had a new prayer. It was a mantra which I repeated each night as I drifted off to sleep. I don't belong here. I ask to be taken out of this world. I don't belong here. I ask to be taken out of this world. I sincerely believed that my earlier prayers to the larger mind had been answered, so I was hopeful that this heartfelt prayer would also be answered. Each night I assumed that that particular night would be my last night on earth. But it never was. Night after night I submitted my earnest prayer request to the larger mind, and day after day I continued to awaken in what I had begun to think of as my residence in hell, a place where the sounds of sex floated through paper-thin walls, where burps were routinely exchanged in the hallway as a form of greeting, where guys could be seen peeing off the dorm balconies on a Friday or Saturday night, and where the hoots and hollers of drunk people floated up to my window from the parking lot. "Larger mind," I inwardly screamed each morning that I awakened. "I don't belong. Why am I still here?" Never once during all of my spring term agony did I doubt the existence of the larger mind. I still believed it was listening to each and every one of my desperate pleas for help in exiting a world I had grown to think of as hell. That the larger mind did not respond was, in my opinion, the height of unloving insensitivity. How could the larger mind be so cruel, most especially after I had given myself completely and utterly to following its guidance? I had recognized my mistakes concerning psychology and the flute, and I had learned from them. Why wasn't the larger mind speaking to me now, guiding me and teaching me as I had initially asked it to do at the beginning of the school year? Was I being tested in some unknown way? My anger against the larger mind grew. My misery was the fault of this vast sea of consciousness which I still believed contained my small human mind. One night, in the midst of my despair, I accompanied a group of individuals from my dorm to the theater to see the Academy Award-winning film The Deer Hunter, starring Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken. I was deeply moved by this film, most especially the scene at the end when Robert De Niro's character Mike tries to save Christopher Walken's character Nick, but Mike's efforts are in vain. Mike watches helplessly as his friend Nick shoots himself in the head during a game of Russian roulette. That scene and the agony it depicted, the pain of trying to save someone who can't be saved pushed me to an edge. I knew that if I didn't try very hard to control myself, the tears streaming down my face as I sat in a public theater would quickly transform into gut-wrenching sobs. I didn't want that, not in such a public place. It was bad enough that, as far as I could tell, I was the only one from our dorm who had tears on her face. Afterwards, still on the verge of tears, I walked back to the dorm surrounded by the playful wrestling and joking, the burps and the laughter of some of my dorm mates. How, I wondered, could they behave like buffoons after watching such a deeply impactful movie? Not having the maturity to see that their clown-like behavior was more than likely a way of shielding themselves from the discomfort of strong emotions, I quickly judged them as heartless and insensitive. That night, I decided that I no longer cared about learning how to love others. Humans weren't worth the effort. I wanted nothing more to do with them. Had my statistics professor for that term ever asked, I could easily have plotted my quickly accelerating despair in the form of a graph using two quantitative variables: the number of times daily I felt assaulted by the world, plotted along the x-axis, and the number of times daily I made a prayer request to be taken out of the world, plotted along the y-axis. The statistical curve of my graph would have indicated a substantial positive growth ratio, and in the opposite corner of my graph, I could have plotted the rapidly descending curvature of my patience for the larger mind. But upon that line, there would have been an end point. That was the morning my patience with the larger mind came to an abrupt stop. Fine, I silently prayed. If you won't take me out of this hellhole, I will do it myself. I soon discovered that it's tricky business planning an exit from hell, most especially when that plan must take into account the desire that one's parents not carry the burden of guilt that often accompanies the suicide of a child. My death would be pain enough for my parents. My secret gift to them, I decided, would be an exit strategy that did not carry the imprint of my own hand. But coming up with such a plan would be difficult. In every spare moment, I thought and I schemed. Maybe I could climb one of the tall trees on campus and fall. But I was such a klutz. Would I actually be able to climb high enough so that the fall would kill me? I certainly would not want to fall and only be paralyzed. I could instead take a walk along the nearby railroad track and jam my shoe between the ties in such a way that it got stuck. Except that I couldn't remember having heard or even seen a train on that track. What a fool I would make of myself if I got stuck on a track that wasn't being used anymore. How long would it take for someone to find me? I doubted that it would be long enough for me to starve to death, but it would probably be long enough for me to have to pee in my pants. Maybe it would be better if I got really drunk, then lay down on my back so that if I puked, I would choke on my own vomit. But what if my body didn't vomit? Of course, that would mean I might die of blood alcohol poisoning, except that someone would probably discover me, and then I would be rushed to the hospital to have my stomach pumped. I could, as an alternate alcohol plan, get drunk, then hang out in front of the toilet, waiting for the urge to vomit, and then, when the urge finally struck, I could dunk my head into the water of the toilet bowl and keep it there until I quit breathing. People would assume that I had passed out, causing my head to fall into the toilet. Ugh, no, too disgusting. There had to be a better solution. One morning, as I trekked across campus to one of my early morning classes, my hair was blown into my face by the rush of a passing dump truck, going what I estimated to be 40 in a 25 miles per hour speed limit zone. It was followed by another dump truck, then another and another. I remembered that each morning this same parade of dirt-filled dump trucks would roar past us students on the sidewalk, walking as a herd to our early morning classes, lidded styrofoam cups of coffee in our hands, small stacks of books in our arms, backpacks strapped to the shoulders of some, but no one talking because it was too early in the morning. Aha, I thought. What a brilliant idea! Surely the spill of a loosely lidded cup of hot coffee would cause a student to flinch and lose her balance, most especially if she were walking too close to the sidewalk's edge because she was attempting to pass a fellow student. A loud exclamation of "shit" might be a nice touch as the student accidentally fell into the path of one of the zooming dump trucks. Yes, this was it, the plan I had been seeking. I could actually see it all happening in my mind's eye, step by step. It would be so simple, and the best thing was, no one would ever suspect that I had intentionally taken my own life. Never once did I consider the guilt that would have been placed upon the shoulders of a dump truck's busy driver. Never once did I consider that other people might be killed if, out of reflex, the dump truck driver were to swerve to the left into oncoming traffic in the other lane in order to avoid killing me. I was too impressed by the ingenuity of my plan. I was sure it would work. I was also sure my parents would be tricked into believing that it had all been a clumsy accident. I only needed to figure out exactly how far from the edge of the sidewalk I would need to trip and fall. "You won't be successful," came the soundless voice from within. "You will only make your life worse." I stopped beside the sidewalk on the lawn of a nearby building. A geyser of rage had suddenly erupted inside me. "God damn it!" I silently screamed to the larger mind. "If you're not going to let me leave, then put me to work." My rage was so intense, I wanted to scream aloud. I was on the verge of losing control. Quickly, I ran to the chemistry building. Before I had dropped my chemistry class, I had discovered a remote basement bathroom that was always empty. I made a beeline for that bathroom, and there in a metal stall, sitting on a black U-shaped toilet seat with nothing but the dim light of a small basement window well above my head, I finally allowed myself to release my gut-wrenching sobs. On and on I cried in that dark basement bathroom, my anger towards the larger mind draining from me like water from a broken dam.